Section 4 ISO. ISO is the last of the three factors which determine the exposure of a photo along with aperture and shutter speed. What exactly is ISO? The ISO determines the sensitivity in the camera, which in turn affects the exposure of the photos. The ISO scale typically starts at 100 and continues to double from this point to the boundary of your camera's capabilities, like 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200 and so on. The starting and the ending points of this range and how well the camera handles the ISO depends solely on the camera that we are using. Most modern cameras have many more points at which we can set the ISO. These fall in between I have mentioned. In the same way, we will find the third stops in the aperture and shutter speed. How does an ISO affect exposure? ISO is one of three determining factors which of a photo's exposure along with aperture and shutter speed. These two affect the lens and exposure time respectively, with ISO directly affecting the sensor or film. To be more specific, the ISO determines how well exposed a photo will be by changing the sensitivity. The ISO scale is similar to shutter speed in the sense that when doubled, the exposure is also doubled. They are proportional to one another. Example, a low ISO number would give a low exposure and a high ISO would give a high exposure. Much simpler than aperture. This is much easier to demonstrate using actual photos. The aperture and shutter speed remain constant throughout these photos, with only the ISO changing, allowing a clear view of its effect. How does ISO affect the quality of photos? As a general rule, the lower the ISO value, the better the quality of the photo. Doubling ISO effectively doubles the exposure, which in turn doubles the digital noise. This noise reduces the detail of a photo, giving the image a grainy, uneven appearances. Lower number is equals to lower sensitivity is equals to final quality photos. To best demonstrate how the ISO affects the image quality, I have taken another series photos. For the purpose of this experiment, I have altered the shutter speed and aperture between photos rather than simply changing ISO to give even exposure, allowing for easier comparison of the difference in quality.